I want to talk about My Dearest. I believe this is the best K-drama that is airing right now in 2023. Yes, I'm going to stand heavy on that claim because it is, okay? Hi, I'm Monique. I am the host of Off by Purple Heart podcast, where I talk to you about K-dramas, C-dramas, BTS, and basically whatever else I want to talk about. In today's episode, I specifically want to talk about My Dearest Part 1 and Part 2. There will be spoilers in this. If you have not watched either part 1 or part 2, I highly recommend to go. I don't know what you're doing. This is literally the best K-drama that's airing right now. I don't want to hear no back talk. It is, okay? So the story of My Dearest, it's both a wartime, not documentary, but a fictional story that is based in wartime, and it is inspired by true events, by a true invasion, but it's in a fictional backdrop, and it's also a very heavy, epic, awe-inspiring romance. So it is a really beautiful, epic, wartime romance set to some of the most beautiful cinematography, some of the best that I've heard in OST, some of the best costuming and acting overall. It is just a visual treat with some top tier performances, and I'm just so happy that part 2 is still shaping up to be incredible. In part 1, we are introduced to the two main characters that are very similar in their cadence and style to the very classic Hollywood film Gone with the Wind. I know this is like considered like the golden age of Hollywood, Gone with the Wind. I am not a fan personally myself, but the two leads in this particular story are drawing heavily from the archetype of Gone with the Wind. With you have the main lead, Jung-hoon, who is your Rhett Butler, who is this dashing player, the rogue type, and he has zero interest in protecting the king, which is going to be a very central theme that's going to play out through the entirety of part 1 and part 2 of the show. And part 2 is currently airing. And then we have the female lead, who's Gil Che, who is our Scarlett O'Hara, who is very cocky, sheltered, and a massive flirt. And she is the beautiful, noble woman that Jung-hoon is completely enraptured with, even though he will not promise her marriage of the sort, and the two of them banter like crazy. And a lot of the earlier episodes before the invasion takes place, we're just getting a lay of the land, and we're getting some of the side characters' stories also brought into focus. There is also like the childhood friend of the female lead that we get a lot of storyline in part 1, and her being in love with Gil Che's crush. This man in particular is probably one of the weakest characters in the show, just a plain old annoyance. And every time Gil Che was simping over him, I was very, very upset because I just can't stand him. The actor is probably a very lovely man. It's just the character I can't tolerate. And we meet a lot of other characters along the way as well. We also have the female leads, personal servant who she treats like a sister as well, who also will have a lot of relevance in the show as it goes through part 1 and part 2. She's regularly a focus. And with the male lead as well, we get some backstory with him, and there's a lot of side characters that fill out his world as well. There's one in particular character that drives me up the wall, Ryan, who is a young boy that he protects when he was like a lot younger. There is quite an age gap between the two of them, and through watching part 1 and part 2, this is where the spoilers are really going to come into play. We learned that they were government slaves, and Jung in particular was able to protect this particular boy who turns out to be an incredible singer, and he runs off with this boy and is able to basically buy the title of a nobleman, because that's kind of the mystery surrounding Jung. He kind of just arrives, no one really knows what his deal is, and he just seems really peculiar, very eccentric. And we learn later on that he was a government slave that was able to break away free and then protect this singer and come into this town. So there's a lot of interesting characters that are played out here and there. I'm just gonna say the romance between the two leads is absolutely phenomenal. It has all the tension and the desire and the burning desire. We're shown in like the first episode that it's foreshadowed they most likely are not going to make it, even though it seems through prophetic dreams that the female lead has that they should be married and will have this deep, beautiful, awe-inspiring romance, but it is going to end tragically. At least that is what is foreshadowed in the first episode, and that's foreshadowed pretty early on, so that's not really a spoiler per se. I'm kind of hoping that the show will not take the same route as Gone with the Wind, where a lot of it seems to be heavily inspired from. I genuinely hope that these two will have a happy ending, but I just don't see that with the seriousness of the subject matter within the show and how it depicts the invasion and how it depicts the cruelty of those that are under subjugation. I think the show does great commentary on not just the bloodied violence of war itself, but the level of cruelty that is wielded towards women and children in particular. I'm glad the show isn't graphic in the sense of showing, sexual violence or SA against the characters, but it's heavily implied often, and especially when there's so much tied to quote-unquote purity, and if you are ever touched by a man, then you are no longer considered marriageable, and the level of guilt and shame that's built into that, not to mention just the level of trauma it is to survive something of that nature, where you'd most likely rather be dead than to be subjected to that level of inhumane cruelty. I like that the show doesn't shy away from that. There's like a lot of scenes that show a lot of these people being auctioned off, and it just creates a pit in your stomach too, because no matter what you're watching in fictitious form, it will never amount to what actually happened. We'll never know the level of atrocity, the level of violence, the depravity, because it's all fictionalized. It is very much watered down, no matter what piece that you watch. But I like that the show doesn't shy away from that, but it's not gratuitous either. I think the show just wants to hammer in the level of danger and the tension and the stakes. But the romance too, I found the earlier episodes just really lighthearted and fun, but once it progressively gets serious and the female lead, Gilche in particular, has to go on her own quest, her own journey to protecting the loved ones that are closest to her, and also protecting her personhood and evolving beyond being this kind of spoiled brat that's just kind of flirting with all the suitable bachelors and trying to catch the attention of her best friend's fiance, and growing into this self-reliant character that is extraordinarily brave and proud. Is really great. She's probably one of my favorite female leads that I have watched this year, and even with her stubbornness and the amount of time she butts heads with the male lead, Jung in particular, they are both cut from the same cloth. They are both very biting in their commentary to one another, but they have so much chemistry and they just see right through each other's bullshit more often than not. And I root for their romance so much, even though you know that it's going to be tragic. I hope it's not. I feel like the amount of time that we invested in these characters thus far, I want there to be at least some form of a bittersweet ending. I don't know if we're going to get that as I said earlier, there's a lot of foreshadowing in part 1 from the very first episode that shows it's not going to be a love tale that's going to have a happy ending. But when they do come together, it is just remarkable. I'm actually on episode 5 of part 2, and we finally get a reuniting of them. And it's more of a playful episode, which is a great relief, because leading up to episode 5, we're shown that Gilche's husband, she ends up marrying an officer during part 1, and she gets separated from him, and he basically lets her down. He does not rescue her, and she's bought and sold off. She was in the royal court. She was able to find a way to maneuver herself out of it, but her life has been constantly in peril. And in the backdrop, Jun-hoon has been protecting her more than once, and she hasn't really been aware, which also lends to a lot of the conflicts that they've had. And then there was a scene in particular with that singer, the younger gentleman that Jun-hoon is been protecting. He finds her at one point and basically lies to her, telling her that Jun-hoon is dead. And it's just been so much back and forth, that these characters keep being so close to one another and then just getting ripped apart once again. And they're able to finally reunite, and it's such a playful episode, episode 5. You get to see them flirt a little bit. You get to see Gilche nurse him back to health, and then you get to see the trauma that has been inflicted on his body and just everything that he has gone through leading up to this point when they have reunited, and just how much he has sacrificed to continue to protect Gilche even when she isn't fully aware of it. And she is kind of brought to the realization of just how much he has sacrificed, and it just rips her apart, just tears her to shred in grief. Yet the love is still so well put together, and I have never seen chemistry like this. I'm just not the biggest fan of historical romances in general, whether it's in book form or in visual media, but I have not been able to put down watching this show. Like, I have been waiting with bated breath. It's just damn good at what it does, and I'm hoping we get a good ending for it. But that is my review so far of My Dearest. Phenomenal show, phenomenal acting, great commentary, and there's also, funny enough, a lot of laughs in it as well, despite the seriousness of a lot of the scenes. And I just think it's like an acting class right now. I think the two actors are just so great at their craft. The chemistry is just beyond. It's just a powerful show. It's just hitting every emotional cue right. Yeah, it's frustrating to not see the two leads be together, and especially when you have characters like the singer that's purposely forcing them apart through lies and deception, and then there's other barriers to them getting together as well, like the evil princess, who I think on some level we're supposed to empathize with, but I generally don't care. It's just keeping you on tenterhooks. There's a lot of tension in it, so I highly recommend, if you have not been watching My Dearest, you need to watch it. Even with the spoilers, who cares? Watch the show, even with the spoilers. It's such good television. I'm putting it down. It is the greatest show airing right now, and I'm saying this as someone who absolutely adored The Glory, part 1 and part 2, and part 2 did air this year. But yeah, The Dearest, my best. Like peak K-drama history is being made with this show. So that is my review. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Off by Purple Heart podcast. I'm going to be continuing to talk about this show because it's going to wrap up in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to talk about other K-dramas that have been airing and a little bit more. I've been tapping back into BL content in addition, and there's going to be an episode following My Dearest where I'm going to talk about a recent BL that I watched that was just very sweet and very interesting, actually, premise that is very, very, very unique. So until then, bye.